She texted, "Don't call me tonight. I need some space." I replied, "Understood." Then I used that same night to pack, transfer everything to my name, and leave. When she texted the next morning saying she was ready to talk, I didn't reply. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. Don't call me tonight. I need some space. That was the entire text. No explanation attached. No softening phrase at the end. No, we'll figure this out tomorrow, okay? Just that sentence, sitting there in a gray bubble, delivered at 7:43 in the evening on a Tuesday. I stared at my phone for maybe 30 seconds. Thumbs hovering. Not shaking, just hovering. Then I typed 2 words. Understood. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter. And for the first time in 4 years, something in my chest didn't panic. Something in my chest went very, very quiet. I was 31 years old. I had been with Brooke for 4 years and some months. We shared a 2-bedroom apartment, my name on the lease, her furniture in every room. That's all the background you need, because everything else about our relationship you'll understand as the night unfolds. I didn't move for about 5 minutes after I put the phone down. I just stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, looking at nothing. The refrigerator hummed. A car honked somewhere outside. The apartment smelled like the pasta she'd made 2 nights ago and the candle she'd burned last weekend. Familiar smells. Comfortable smells. Smells that had tricked me into thinking comfort meant something was okay. I picked up the phone again. Not to text her back. Not to call. I opened my contacts and scrolled to Owen. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, what's up? You free tonight? Yeah, I'm just watching something. What? I looked around the apartment, at the throw pillows she'd picked out, the frame she'd hung slightly crooked, the little ceramic dish by the door where we both dropped our keys. I think I'm done, I said. Silence on his end for 2 full seconds. Done like done? Yeah. Another pause. I'm coming over. No. I said it calmly. I don't need you to come over. I just needed to say it out loud to someone first. Say what out loud? That I'm done. Hey, I said. Hey. I put the groceries on the counter. You okay? Fine. I didn't push it. I knew better than to push it. I'd learned, through very specific trial and painful error, that when Brooke was in that particular mood, pressing for details was treated as an attack. So I unpacked the groceries. I asked if she wanted dinner. She said she wasn't hungry. I cooked for one. I ate at the kitchen table while she stayed on the couch. At 7:41, she walked into the bedroom without saying goodnight. At 7:43, my phone buzzed. Don't call me tonight. I need some space. From inside our own apartment. From a woman who was maybe 22 feet away from me. Now, here's the part that matters. Here is the part that explains why my reaction wasn't to knock on the bedroom door. Why it wasn't to slide a note under it. Why it wasn't to do what I had done every single other time she sent some version of that message. She had asked for space 6 times in the past 14 months. 6 specific instances I could count. Each one had arrived after a version of the same pattern. She'd get quiet. I'd try to connect. She'd withdraw more. I'd try harder. And eventually she'd send some variation of, I need space to think. Or, I can't do this right now. Or once, memorably, you're suffocating me and you don't even realize it. And every single time, I had honored it. Every single time, I had backed off, given her the room, waited patiently, and then, when she decided she was ready, welcomed her back without requiring any explanation for what had caused the retreat in the first place. That last part is the part one should have paid more attention to. The pattern was always the same. She'd pull away. I'd give space. She'd return on her own timeline. I'd be so relieved she was back that I'd never actually ask what had happened. And because I never asked, nothing ever changed. And because nothing ever changed, it happened again. And again. And again. 6 times. This was number 7. I stood in that kitchen after her text, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to knock on the door. I didn't feel the anxious pull to fix something before she went to sleep. I didn't feel that low-grade hum of dread that had become so normalized in my nervous system that I'd stopped noticing it was there. What I felt instead was something close to recognition, like finally seeing a shape clearly after squinting at it in fog for too long. I picked up my phone and called Owen back. Okay, I said. Talk me through this. Through what? Through what I do tonight. Because I don't want to be dramatic. I don't want to blow up something I might regret. But I also can't sit here and wait for her to decide she's ready to have a conversation with the person she lives with. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. Do you want me to remind you of the thing you told me in March? I knew exactly what he meant. I said, yeah, go ahead. He said, you told me that if she did this again, the cold shoulder, the disappearing without an explanation, the I need space thing, that you were going to take it as your answer. You said if it happened again, you were going to stop treating it as a communication style issue and start treating it as information. Silence. You remember saying that? He asked. Word for word, I said. So. I exhaled slowly through my nose. So I'm taking it as my answer. I want to be very honest about what happened next, because I've seen the version of this story where the guy is cold and calculating, moving through the apartment like some kind of revenge machine, packing with his jaw set and a dramatic soundtrack playing in his head. That wasn't what happened. What happened was messier than that, more human than that. I sat down at the kitchen table after I got off the phone with Owen, and I put my face in my hands, and I stayed like that for a while. Not crying. Not yet. Just sitting with the weight of what I was considering. Because leaving is not a small thing. For years is not a small thing. Even a relationship that had hurt you has roots, and pulling those roots up doesn't feel like freedom in the moment. In the moment, it feels like surgery without anesthetic. But I had been in that apartment long enough to know something true about myself. I knew that if I went to bed that night without doing anything, if I just waited again, the way I had waited 6 times before, I would wake up in the morning having lost something more important than the relationship. I would have lost the last piece of myself that still believed I deserved better. So I got up from the table. I went to the second bedroom, the one we used as an office and storage, and I found the boxes I'd broken down flat after our move. I pulled out 4 of them. I set them against the wall, and I started. I started with the practical things, the financial things, because I knew that if I just packed my clothes and left, she could come back to the apartment and nothing would actually be resolved. My name was on the lease, but we had a joint savings account, something we'd opened 8 months into the relationship because it had seemed like a reasonable idea at the time. It had my money in it, more of my money than hers, by a significant margin, because the nature of our respective jobs meant I earned more and contributed more. I had never made an issue of that. I had never even brought it up. But I knew the account existed, and I knew that if things went badly, access to it could become a problem. So the first thing I did, before a single piece of clothing went into a box, was open my banking app. I transferred my portion of the joint savings into my individual account. Her half I left untouched. Every dollar that was mine, I moved. The transfer went through immediately. Then I called the bank's after-hours line and started the process to have my name removed from the joint account, or more accurately, to close it and issue her the remaining balance. The representative was professional and walked me through it without drama. It took 11 minutes. When I hung up, I realized my hands were steady. The packing was next. I didn't take anything that was hers. I want to be clear about that. Not a single piece of furniture. Not a single kitchen item. Not the TV she'd picked out or the rug she'd found at that market downtown. I took what was mine. My clothes, all of them. My books, every one of them. The small collection of things that had lived in the apartment long before she moved in. A framed photograph from a trip I'd taken with Owen and a few other friends 3 years before I met Brooke. A lamp I'd bought at an estate sale. A coffee maker that my mother had given me as a housewarming gift. Personal documents. Passport, birth certificate, a folder of financial records I kept in the desk drawer. My laptop. My chargers. The single bottle of good whiskey I'd been saving for no particular occasion. I packed it all with a kind of focused calm that surprised me. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't throwing things. I was moving with the deliberate care of someone who understood that how you leave something says something about who you are, and I wanted to leave this cleanly. Somewhere around 10:30 at night, I sat on the edge of the office chair and texted Owen. 2 boxes left. Then I'm done. He replied almost immediately. Where are you going tonight? I hadn't thought about that part yet. Hotel, I typed. Just for tonight. I'll figure out the rest tomorrow. You can come here. I know. Thank you. I think I need tonight alone. Okay. Call me if that changes. I finished the last 2 boxes. I stacked them near the front door. Then I sat down at the kitchen table one more time. The apartment was still mostly intact. You wouldn't have walked in and immediately known someone was in the middle of leaving. But the closet in the master bedroom was half empty. The office shelf was bare. The hooks by the door had only one set of keys on them now. Hers. Mine were in my jacket pocket. I wrote her a note. This is the part people ask about when I've told this story. They always want to know if I left a note. I did. I didn't know her one, but I left one anyway, because I didn't want this to be cruel. I didn't want her to wake up in the morning to a missing person mystery. I wanted her to understand what had happened without having to hear my voice break while I explained it. I kept it short. I wrote that I'd given this a lot of thought. I wrote that I'd decided to respect the space she asked for by making it permanent. I wrote that her half of the joint savings account would be accessible to her by the end of the business day. I wrote that the lease was in my name, so she had 30 days to decide what she wanted to do about the apartment. I wouldn't force her out sooner than that. I wrote that I hoped she found whatever it was she was looking for. I signed it with no name, just the date. I folded it once and left it on the kitchen counter, right where I'd put my phone face down earlier that evening. Then I picked up my boxes, 2 trips to the car, and I left. I drove to a hotel 3 miles away. Nothing fancy, just a clean, quiet room with a firm bed and a view of a parking lot. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The room was very still. No refrigerator hum. No faint sound of traffic filtered through a familiar window. No distant sound of Brooke shifting in bed, or the muffled sound of her late-night scrolling. Just quiet. I had expected to feel devastated. I had braced for it during the drive. The hot surge of grief you feel when something that was part of your life just isn't anymore. And it came, but it didn't feel the way I'd expected. It didn't feel sharp. It felt like something releasing, like a hand that had been clenched for a long time finally uncurling. I lay back on the bed without changing out of my clothes. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about the first 6 months with Brooke, how genuinely good they had been, how easy everything had felt, the way she used to laugh at things I said that weren't even that funny, the trips we took in year 2 that I still had photos of somewhere in the cloud, the version of us that had existed before whatever had shifted. I let myself grieve that version. Not her, not the version of her I'd been living with for the last year and a half, but that earlier thing, that thing that had felt real. I grieved it fully, right there in that hotel room, and then I closed my eyes. I should tell you about the Christmas dinner, because you need this piece to understand the full picture. 14 months ago, Brooke and I went to her family's home for the holidays. Her cousin, a man named Callum who I'd always found slightly difficult, made a comment at the dinner table. It was directed at me, a remark about how I seemed very intense for someone so quiet, paired with a smile that was designed to look like a compliment while functioning as an insult. I let it go in the moment. On the drive home, I mentioned it to Brooke, calmly, not looking for a fight, just sharing that the comment had landed poorly. Her response was, "Callum is just like that. You take everything so personally." I said, "I don't think I'm being oversensitive." The comment was condescending. She said, "Can we not do this right now?" And that was the end of the conversation. A week later, when I brought it up again, because it had stayed with me, the way things do when they're not fully addressed, she told me I had a tendency to hold on to things too long. She said it in a tone that implied this was a character flaw. I didn't push it further, but I noticed something that night. I noticed that when I had a problem, it became a problem with me for having the problem. I had noticed that before, in smaller moments. But that night it registered as a pattern rather than an incident, and I filed it away. And then I told myself it wasn't that bad. And then I convinced myself I was the one overreacting. The way you do when someone has made you doubt your own perception enough times that doubting yourself starts to feel like the responsible thing to do. 3 months after the Christmas dinner, Brooke started working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays. New project, or so she said. I didn't interrogate it. I was not, by nature, a suspicious person. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't track her location. I asked the normal questions. How's the project going? Is the team good to work with? And I accepted the normal answers. But there was a man named Felix involved, a colleague. She mentioned him casually a few times, not in a way that seemed significant at first, just in the way you mention someone you're working closely with. In April of that year, I came across a conversation on her laptop. Not snooping. I want to be specific about that. She had left her laptop open on the coffee table. I was looking for the TV remote. I wasn't reading her screen. But when I reached across to move the laptop out of the way, I caught a few lines. I wasn't meant to see them, but I did. They were not explicitly inappropriate. They were flirtatious, playfully so, the kind of message exchange that had a particular energy to it, the energy of two people who were enjoying each other just a little more than the professional situation required. I closed the laptop. I said nothing, but later that night, I told her what I'd seen, not accusingly. I told her in the same tone I'd tell her if I'd seen something that confused me and needed context. She was furious. Immediately. Not defensive, furious. She said I had no right to look at her private conversations. I said I hadn't been looking. I'd accidentally seen. She said it didn't matter how it happened. What mattered was that I was now interrogating her over a casual work friendship. I said I wasn't interrogating her. She said, "This is exactly the problem with you. You don't trust me." I said, "I didn't say I didn't trust you. I said what I read felt off to me, and I wanted to talk about it." She said, "There's nothing to talk about," and she went to bed. 2 days of coldness followed. Then she emerged from it like nothing had happened. She was warm again, affectionate, made breakfast on Saturday, suggested we go for a walk, and I, desperate for the warmth after 2 days of frost, let it go. Again, I let it go, because having her back felt more urgent than having an answer. That's the mechanism I need you to understand. It's not dramatic. It's not a single betrayal. It's a slow erosion. It's learning, through repeated experience, that expressing a concern will cost you more than swallowing it. It's learning that the relationship operates with a particular set of unwritten rules. Rules she wrote, and I agreed to without reading them carefully. Rule 1. Her feelings are the priority. Rule 2. If my feelings conflict with her feelings, my feelings are incorrect. Rule 3. If I point out Rule 2, I am being unreasonable. Rule 4. If I'm upset about Rule 3, I'm too sensitive. Rule 5. If I'm too sensitive too many times, I get treated to the silence. And the silence ends when she decides it ends. Not when we've resolved anything. When she decides. 7 times over 14 months, I had received some version of that silence. And 6 out of 7 times, I had waited it out like a person standing outside in the rain, hoping the door would eventually open. Tonight was the 7th time, and I was done waiting in the rain. My phone was on the hotel bedside table. I had turned the volume off when I got to the room. Not silenced, actually off. I slept better than I had in months. I woke up at 6:52 in the morning. Lay there for a moment, getting reacquainted with where I was. Gray light coming through the curtain gap. Firm, anonymous mattress. No sounds from another room. No subtle tension in my shoulders about what mood she'd be in when I walked out to the kitchen. I picked up my phone, turned the volume back on. There were 6 notifications. The first 3 were from last night. A news alert, an email from work, Owen checking in. The next one was from Brooke, sent at 11:17 p.m. "Are you already asleep?" The next one came at 11:54 p.m. "I see you read my note. Where are you?" Wait, she said she read my note, but I had put the note on the kitchen counter. If she read it, she'd come out of the bedroom at some point after I'd left. She'd walked out and found the apartment half changed. Found my note. Found her half of the joint savings, untouched. Found only her keys on the hook. I sat with that image for a moment. Not with satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. There was no satisfaction. There was something more complicated. Something that felt like watching a door close from the other side. The 6th notification was from this morning. 7:09 a.m. Less than 20 minutes ago. "I'm ready to talk whenever you are." I read it twice. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I got up. I showered. I got dressed. I called down to the front desk and asked about extending for another night. They said that was fine. I ordered room service for the first time in probably 5 years. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and watched the parking lot wake up. Cars pulling in and out, a hotel employee moving a luggage cart, pigeons doing their indifferent pigeon things on the asphalt. My phone stayed face down. I did not reply to her text. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Not because I was playing some kind of power game. But because for the first time in 14 months, her timeline was not my emergency. She was ready to talk. Good. She could be ready to talk for as long as she needed. I wasn't there anymore. Owen called at 9:30. "How are you doing?" "Better than I expected," I said honestly. "Did she reach out?" "Yeah. Twice last night, once this morning." "Did you respond?" "No." He exhaled, not judgment, just processing. "How do you feel about that?" I looked out the window at the parking lot. "Clear," I said. "Sad, but clear." He asked if I needed anything. I told him I needed help finding a short-term furnished place to stay while I figured out the next few months. He said he'd send me some listings. He also said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it with the understanding that I debated telling you for a long time." Something in the way he said it made my coffee cup feel heavier. "Tell me," I said. Owen said it carefully. He told me that about 5 months ago, at a gathering at a mutual friend's place, a gathering I hadn't attended because I'd been working late, he had seen Brooke and Felix arrive together. Not together as in they'd carpooled, the way colleagues sometimes do. Together as in they'd arrived in Felix's car, and the energy between them had been distinctly not collegial. He said he hadn't brought it up to me because he hadn't been certain. He said he'd argued with himself about it for months. He said seeing me deteriorate slowly over the course of the year, watching me second-guess myself at every turn, watching me apologize for things that weren't my fault. It had made him feel awful for staying quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have told you sooner." I stayed quiet for a long time. There is a particular feeling that arrives when something you half knew gets confirmed. It's not shock. It's more like watching a photograph develop. The image was already there. You just finally get to see it clearly. "It explains the Tuesdays and Thursdays," I said finally. "Yeah," Owen said. "It explains why she got so defensive when I saw the messages on her laptop." "Yeah. It explains why every time I tried to raise a concern, she needed space. Because the space wasn't about processing feelings. It was about managing two situations." "I think so." I set my coffee cup down. "I'm not even angry," I said. And I meant it. Angry would have required surprise. I wasn't surprised. I was just sad. And underneath the sad, there was that quiet again. The same quiet I'd felt in the kitchen when I put the phone face down. The quiet of a thing that had run its course. She texted 4 more times over the course of that day. At 10:15 a.m., "I found your note. I think we should talk before either of us makes any permanent decisions." At 12:44 p.m., "I understand you're upset, but leaving without a conversation is not fair." At 3:07 p.m., "I know you're reading these. Please just let me know you're okay." At 6:52 p.m., "This is cruel. After 4 years, the least I deserve is a conversation." I read every one. I didn't respond to any of them. Not cruelly. I want to keep coming back to that because I think it matters. There was nothing cruel in my silence. What would have been cruel was continuing. What would have been cruel was sitting down to have another conversation that led nowhere, where my concerns became my character flaws, where her needs eclipsed my needs, where we talked for hours and reached a conclusion that looked like resolution, but was actually just her waiting out my discomfort until I agreed to stay. I had had that conversation before. I had had it in various forms over a year and a half. I knew exactly how it went. I knew the specific cadences of it. The moments where she'd soften just enough to make me feel like we were making progress. The moments where she'd turn something back around. The final landing of, "So are we okay?" That meant, "Can we stop doing this now?" I knew it so well I could have written the script in advance. So no, I did not sit down to have that conversation. Thursday of that week, I called a property manager about a short-term lease on a furnished apartment. I saw the place on Friday afternoon. It was smaller than what I was used to. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that opened directly onto the living space, windows that looked out onto a row of trees rather than a street. I signed the paperwork the same day. I moved the boxes from my car up to the 3rd floor by myself. It took 3 trips. When I had set the last box down and closed the apartment door and stood in the middle of that small, quiet space, with its anonymous beige walls and its slight smell of fresh paint and its windows full of trees, I felt something arrive. Not happiness. Not relief exactly. Something more like ownership. Like I was standing in a space that was entirely, uncomplicated mine. No footnotes. No negotiating what the mood would be when I walked through the door. No low hum of tension underneath every evening. Just my boxes, my lamp from the estate sale, my coffee maker from my mother, and my books lined up on the windowsill because there was no shelf yet. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch. A piece of furniture that had come with the furnished place and that I had no particular feelings about. And I let the quiet of the room settle over me. And for the first time in over a year, I breathed all the way down. She called on Saturday. I let it ring. She called again Sunday morning. I let it ring again. On Sunday afternoon, she sent a voice message. I let it sit unopened for several hours. Then, in the evening, I opened it. Her voice came through the speaker, and it did something to me. Not the thing she probably hoped it would do, but something. She sounded genuinely distressed. Not performatively. I had learned the difference between the two over 4 years, and this was the real version. She said she'd had no idea I was this unhappy. She said she knew she'd been distant lately, and she knew that hadn't been fair to me. She said there were things going on in her life, things she hadn't been handling well, and she hadn't communicated any of it, and she was sorry for that. She said she didn't want it to end like this. She said she wanted the chance to actually talk. Not to fix things necessarily, just to understand. She said she deserved that much. I listened to the entire message. I sat with it for a long time after it ended. Here's what I noticed. She said she hadn't communicated well. She did not say what she hadn't communicated about. She said there were things going on. She did not name the things. She said she was sorry. She did not specify for what. Even in her most earnest, distressed attempt to reach me. Even in the voice message where she was clearly not performing. She had still not found a way to be direct. She had still not found a way to say, I think I may have hurt you in specific ways, and here they are, and I want to account for them. She'd given me the shape of an apology without the substance of one, and I recognized that shape. I had accepted that shape many times before, each time telling myself it was enough. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. It just felt like enough in the moment because I wanted it to be. I didn't respond to the voice message. I did, eventually, send one text. About 2 weeks after I'd left. It was short. It said, I've heard everything you've sent. I'm okay. I'm not ready to have a conversation, and I'm not sure if I ever will be. I hope you're taking care of yourself. She responded within 4 minutes. Does this mean it's really over? I put the phone down. I didn't answer that. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because the answer was already visible in every action I had taken over the past 2 weeks. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let what you've done speak without adding words to it. I want to tell you about one more thing. About 2 months after I moved into the small apartment with the trees outside the window, I was unpacking a box I delayed getting to, the kind of box full of miscellaneous things you shove in at the last minute. At the bottom of it, I found a birthday card. She'd given it to me the previous year. I hadn't remembered packing it. I opened it. Her handwriting inside, the slightly left-leaning cursive she had. It said, to the person who always shows up, even when I'm not easy to show up for. You deserve more patience from me. I'm working on it. I sat on the floor with that card for a long time. Not because it changed anything, but because it made something clearer. She had known. She had known what she was doing and what it was costing me. She'd written it down in a birthday card. She just hadn't done anything about it. And that, not the distance, not the deflections, not even the thing with Felix. That was the thing that settled it for me most completely. Knowing isn't the same as changing. Being sorry isn't the same as stopping. Loving someone isn't the same as treating them well. She had loved me in her way. I didn't doubt that. But love that keeps you small is not the love you stay for. I put the card back in the box, not to keep it as a wound, but because throwing it away felt like pretending 4 years had been nothing. They weren't nothing. They were real. They had taught me real things. They had cost me real things. And they had eventually, on a Tuesday night in an apartment that smelled like old pasta and burnt candle wax, given me back something I hadn't realized I'd misplaced. The ability to hear someone say, I need space. And to say, understood. And to mean it completely. Not as a pause. Not as a performance of patience while I waited to be let back in. As an answer. As a decision. As the beginning of a different life. It has been 8 months now. The trees outside my window have gone through summer and are moving toward the colors of early autumn. I've added a bookshelf. I've learned that I like the mornings when it's just me and coffee and a book, and I don't have to monitor the emotional temperature of a room before I've had a chance to wake up. I've had exactly 2 conversations with Brooke since I left. Both of them brief. Both of them civil. Neither of them the conversation she originally wanted. She is, from what I understand through mutual acquaintances, no longer working with Felix. I don't know what that means. I don't spend much time wondering about it. Owen came over for dinner last week. We cooked together and talked until midnight. At one point he asked, do you miss her? I thought about it honestly. I miss the version of us that existed in the first year. I said, I don't miss the last 18 months. He nodded like that made sense. It did. Both things can be true. You can grieve something and still know that leaving it was right. You can love a person and still know that loving them from a distance is the only version of that love that's sustainable. You can receive a text that says, I need space, and respond with understood and mean it as something other than obedience. Sometimes, understood is the moment you stop asking for permission to protect yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is take the space they asked for and use it entirely for yourself. She texted me on a Tuesday. I replied with 2 words. By Wednesday morning, I had a hotel key in my pocket, my half of the savings secured, and boxes in a room where the trees outside the window changed color in autumn. When she texted the next morning, ready to talk, I didn't reply. Not out of spite, not out of a desire to win something, but because for the first time in a very long time, I was busy. Busy being someone who didn't need to wait for someone else to decide he was worth having a conversation with. Busy being in a quiet room that was entirely his. Busy finally, irrevocably, choosing himself. If this story stayed with you, you probably already know why. Sometimes the bravest reply is silence. And sometimes, I'm ready to talk, comes just a little too late.